Alrighty, so as we move to apply some of those principles we talked about when it comes to reasons basics, I'm going to show you guys a really quick example of where I take an example of notes here that we have written out for Halter in this case, and then how we take this basic information that we wrote down while we were actively judging. We have our placements and all of our details here. All right, how we take that information and then put it into a reason format. All right, and so as you know, this top portion stuff you can kind of ignore unless your class will have questions, right? So you can see up here we have our placing. This is sort of an extra comment. And then as you guys have questions, most of the time they will ask for very specific, distinct details to identify that animal out of that class. So in this case, we're talking about some geldings here. And so this note taker just jotted down like a couple things that to identify each one of those animals. All right. I'm not really going to be concerned with this as of right now. All I really care about is my placing here and then the notes over here. All right. So how these notes are lined out, all right, is she has 3/2. So this is our top pair. Okay. Then we have 2. This is going to be our grants, right? And so this is where, out of this argument, right, we want to try to complement 2, even though he's not the best out of this class of geldings. We want to give him some kind of benefit of the doubt where he did succeed. And so in this case, he was heavier muscled. All right. Next, okay, we have our middle pair. This is 2/4. Okay. Again, you can see that in our placing. So 2/4. 3/2 here. All right. So 2 was over 4 because he was heaviest muscled out of this class. You can see that definition in his stifle, gaskin, forearm, and his V within his chest. He was also more balanced, had a shorter back than 4 when compared, and a longer underline. So this is our comparisons again, right? Then we want to have a grant because we don't want to dog on 4 too much. So in this middle pair, right, 4 was slightly taller. And when they had movements, in our district competition, we typically don't have movements. In this one, they had them walk and trot. And so 4, when compared to, was taller and moved straighter and more correct as they had them walk and trot. All right. As we move to our bottom pair, we have 4/1. 4 beats 1 because he was larger, heavier muscled, taller, longer legs, wider through the stifle, gaskin, forearm, and such. Most of this is focused on muscle. All right. As well as something to note, he was the most correct moving in this class. And then lastly, 1, it doesn't look like she has anything decent or for grants. I'm going to kind of make up a grant because I like to at least have 3, 1 for each of these pairs here. All right. So as of right now, she only has 2. Okay. So again, we're going to start with our opening statement. All right. So what I'm going to write down here is just something as simple as I placed this class of geldings 3, 2, 4, 1. All right. Now make sure that you identify what kind of class we're talking about, right? If it was performance, we would put Western Pleasure or performance horses or whatever it might be. Be very specific and then give your placing. All right. Next, I'm going to have like an opening statement over the first place here. So I'm going to talk about 3 a little bit and say why he was the best out of all of the horses, right? And that's going to kind of bleed into my comparison of 3/2, right? So as I do this, watch what I'm doing, right? So I'm going to say 3 comes out right on top of this class while bringing balance, the ideal balance and athleticism. We want to see from a high quality gelding. All right, so that is really what makes him superior, right? Is as we pick this apart, I'm looking for ideal balance and athleticism, So we're looking for proportionality. We're able to divide that horse into thirds and they come with a decent amount of muscling and profile. All right, so I'm going to talk him up a little bit more when compared. So this is coming into my comparisons here. Okay, when compared to 2, he is more easily divided into thirds. in addition to showing a longer, trimmer, and more masculine character about his neck and head. All right. So really quick, I'm just going to show you where I pulled these from as I was writing this down. He is more easily divided into thirds. If we look at this pairing of 3/2 up here in our notes, right? 3/2, he is more balanced. So I really just, instead of saying he is more balanced, the more depth you can add to these reasons, the better. All right. You want to make it sound at very least like you know what you're talking about. So if you can take something like as you're jotting notes, this is really quick. But as you write reasons, the more you can kind of like depict it, right? So by saying he's balanced, what I really mean is that I can divide him into thirds, right? Proportionality. Another thing, longer, trimmer, and more masculine character about his neck and head. Let's take a look up here again, right? Longer underline, longer, trimmer neck, okay? And breed character about his head. And then they also go on to say they saw a shorter ear, more prominent jaw, and straighter, right? These are all masculine features that we want to see about that head. All I did was tie those two together, okay? Now I'm going to move into, so this kind of concludes my opening statement. Now I'm going to grant, right? So I'm going to say, we're going to say something nice about 2, okay? So while I grant that 2 was heavier in muscle, I criticize him for having the more feminine features. All right, so I grant him, and then, while I grant that 2 is heavier in muscle, I criticize him for having the more feminine features, right? So here's my grant, here's my criticism, where I pulled that from. Okay, 2 was heavier muscled out of this pairing. This is her grants. And the more feminine features, right? If this is something I just kind of pulled out of here, right? If the first set of notes, if you notice that 3 had a much more masculine ear, jaw, neck, all of the above, you could just use that as an alternative. You know, how I could say this different is like, instead of I criticize him for having more feminine features, you could say something like, I wish I would have seen, or I would have liked to see more masculine features about his neck and head. All right. Or his profile, if you really want to mix it up and not sound repetitive. All right. So that is the top pair, opening, first grant, and first criticism done. Now I'm going to transition into my middle pair, right? So I'm going to say moving to a more obvious middle pair of 2 and 4. 2 exhibits a more chiseled upper third, which can be seen in his more tapered V of his chest and definition throughout his forearm and stifle. All right, so this is my top pair. So I'm my middle pair, right? So this is my transition into my middle pair. And then I'm really just rinsing and repeating, right? So this is, now we're moving on to my comparisons. Of 2 and 4, 2 is better because, right, he had a more chiseled upper third, which can be seen, this is where you would look for it, in a more tapered V within his chest. So he saw a lot more definition, a little more pop, a cutter V from looking from the front end, and more definition throughout his forearm and stifle towards the rear. All right. Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to add one more thing here. I also found 2 to have a shorter back and proportional underline. All right, I'm really just trying to add something here. Notice how I added 2 things here for 3/2, right? So he was the higher quality gelding, yada, 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 divided into thirds, and longer, trimmer, more masculine character, right? So instead of just saying one thing, right, that's where you're going to gain points, or at least assure your points. If you can say more than one comparison, I guarantee you're going to raise your chances of bumping from a 30 to 40 basic score up to a 40 to 50 if you can. All right. Okay, so a more proportional underline. Let's keep moving, right? Now I'm going to do my grants. Okay, notice how I mix this up here. You don't really have to do spaces. I'm just doing this for like a visual here, as you can see these differences. So now I'm done with my transition for my middle pair. I have my comparisons, and I'm going to grant, but I'm going to say it slightly different. I'm going to say I concede, or I'll admit, okay, that 4 out of this middle pair was taller and sounder in his movement, even though I would have liked to see more balance in his profile. All right, so notice how I changed the wording here. So this format is still the same, right? So we still have a grant, okay? We still have a grant. So I concede, I'll admit that 4 was taller and sounder in his movement, because if we look back here at her notes from the middle pair, heavier muscled, yada, 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 shorter back. 4, the good thing about him, right, in this bottom part, so we're going to admit something good about this guy. He was taller and he moved straighter, right? And how I translated that is I said, I can see that 4 was taller and sounder in his movement, okay? Even though I would have liked to see more balance in his profile, right? You could probably talk about muscle definition. I just try to mix it up instead of saying like, yes, this was best because of the muscle. It sometimes sounds repetitive if you say this is good because of its muscle, and I would have liked to see more muscle. If you want to throw in something extra or give it a little more depth, that would be ideal. Okay, so this is done. I've granted 4 of this middle pair, and I've criticized him as well. Okay, now I'm going to transition into my bottom pair. So concluding with a bottom pair of 4 and 1. 4 brings more strength in his rear third, having a longer set of legs, wider through his stifle. I'm going to change this more width about his stifle and gaskin. Let me see if I can change this. So concluding with the bottom pair. So here's my transition. We're here now. Now I'm going to move on to comparisons. Why 4 is better than 1. 4 brings more strength in his rear third, as well as having a longer set of legs and more width about his stifle and gasket. Okay, so here's my comparison. This is why I placed 4 over 1. Now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to add something she noted. So he's the straightest and most correct moving of this class. That's something, if you see it, and it's pretty noticeable, but it didn't really, contribute to deciding on this guy, you can still put it, right? So we're going to say it like this. He was the most correct in his movement within this class, as he was straighter at a walk and trot. Okay, and that's it. Now I'm going to grant 1 something. She doesn't, like I said, she doesn't really have a grant for here. It's just criticism, which is fine. Like it's the bottom. We like to emphasize why 3 is the superior and why 1 is the inferior of the class, but it does help to have at least 3 grants. So I'm going to add another one here. Okay, I'll admit that I had a cleaner, one had a cleaner throat latch, if I can spell latch. He was the smallest, lightest, muscled, and most feminine of this class. Therefore, I placed this class as 3, 2, 4, 1. All right. So there's our reasons, right? And so this seems like a lot. If you're really good at reasons, I think where practice makes perfect is you take this concept where you can take notes on any class or any object, and you can apply the same set of steps right? Our opening statement, comparisons, grant, criticism, transition, rinse and repeat. All right. You could apply the same concept to any other object, and you can come up with these transition words or phrases on the go, right? And so at the end of the day, really all you have to memorize is why you place, right, these guys. Okay. So write out your comparisons, write out your grants, and then you can kind of talk about criticisms because it's fresh in your mind. You just talked about why 3 was better than 2. Right? And then the transitions come with that. Okay. Now, just know that if you take this and you read it from your paper, that is okay. But know that you will be limited to 25 points. Right. And if you read that word for word and it's to their liking and it has every single one of these components here, I guarantee you'll have a 25 out of 50. All right. However, if you're chasing that 50 out of 50 or a 40 out of 50 or whatever it might be, that is where you need to kind of practice this form on the fly, being able to go off of just notes. That's the challenge here, right? Because you really only have so much time. If you're lucky and you're towards the end of the line of reasons, you maybe have some time to write this out, and I would advise that. But other times, you might be first in line. And so all you got is this. And so if you want to be good, memorize the sequence of it, practice it, and be able to do it on the fly with just these notes, okay? So if we were to recap this, okay, and I was going to read off these notes as I was giving them, right? You want to say it with confidence, make it sound like you are convicted and you know what you're talking about, okay? Or you with conviction, excuse me, okay? So I'm walking up to the judge and I place this class of geldings 3, 2, 4, 1. 3 comes out right on top of this class while bringing an ideal balance and athleticism we want to see from a higher quality gelding. When compared to 2, he is more easily divided into thirds, in addition to showing a longer, trimmer, and more masculine character about his neck and head. While I do grant that 2 was heavier in the muscle, I criticize him for having the more feminine features. Moving on to the more obvious middle pair of 2 and 4, 2 exhibits a more chiseled upper third, which can be seen in his more tapered V of his chest and definition throughout his forearm and stifle. I also found 2 to have a shorter back and proportional underline. While I concede that 4 was taller and sounder in his movement, even though I would have liked to see more balance in his profile. Concluding with the bottom pair of 4 and 1, 4 brings more strength in his rear third, as well as having a longer set of legs and more width about his stifle and gaskin. He was the most correct in his movement within this class, as he was straighter at his walk and trot. I'll admit that 1 was cleaner, had a cleaner throat latch. He was the smallest, lightest muscled, and most feminine of this class. Therefore, I placed this class 3, 2, 4, 1. All right. Now, in that presentation, you can notice, like I was kind of catching myself because I was like, man, I messed up here in my writing. And so this is where, like, if you're able to do it on the fly, you kind of notice how I maybe added a word here or two I maybe shouldn't have added while I concede or whatever it might be. The more comfortable you are with that and it flows like that, that's what you want, right? If you add a couple words here, that is fine. The only thing I would caution you against is if you go over 2 minutes, right? Realistically, we want to be able to say these reasons as concisely and as organized as we possibly can within a minute and a half to a minute if we can. All right. Try not to go over 2 minutes. All right. This concludes how to apply these reasons and stuff. So I hope this helps.